I'm Gregory Sweet. Thank you so much for joining me. You're listening to KSVR 91.7 Mount Vernon, simulcasting on 90.1 FM KSVU, Hamilton Concrete Upriver Radio. I've got my special guest with me here today for you to listen to. Randy Hathaway is here. Hi, Randy. Have we got your mic all hooked up here?
I think so. Does it sound
Yeah,
good?
just pull that one just a little closer
Okay.
to you there.
How's that? Pretty good?
You're in good shape.
Okay.
You're in good shape.
Thank you, Greg. I'm doing good.
Good. Randy, I understand that you have retired from playing classical music. You'll come out of retirement every once in a great while.
Yeah, I'll come every once in a while.
But this particular double CD, which, by the way, is fantastic, it also has some vocals that are on it, too, and we're going to play you one of those in a little bit. But these are all your compositions, but not... I think I saw you playing on at least one song, though.
I did. I made a guest appearance on one song. I came out of retirement for that.
That's great. So tell me a little bit about this album.
We have 18 musicians on the album and 13 guitarists, 3 vocalists, a flutist, and a violist. I know, it's pretty crazy.
It's quite a combination.
And then I took it a little further. All the pieces have been rendered into sheet music, and I just thought it would be really special to have a unique cover. So there's a different piece of artwork representing every song, and I incorporated 10 artists, and it's just beautiful.
That's great.
The whole project.
The cover is in itself inside and outside of the double album, or just it's
well,
terrific.
we have to thank my sister Sandra Fredrickson for that.
Ah.
I brought her out of retirement as well.
Yes. I see. That's incredible. This first song is one that I heard when I was reviewing the CD, and I liked it a lot, and I mentioned it to you, and you said, yeah, let's do that. Tell me a little bit about this song before I put it on.
First of all, you're going to hear Whitney Lyman as a vocalist.
Beautiful vocalist.
Oh, absolutely.
She's
Wonderful
incredible.
person, too. Yeah. Very talented artist. And the guitarist, Jessica Papkoff, who I've known for at least a dozen years or more. So I put both of those two together. And like a lot of the musicians, they hadn't performed together, but they did a beautiful job together.
Absolutely beautiful, Randy. And Miss Pupkoff, that plays the guitar, is also extremely talented.
Oh, yeah.
Isn't
It's
she?
just beautiful playing. And
it's great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, Randy, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here. Please, please, please come back.
Oh, thank you. I'm here at KSVR with Gregory Sweet.
Hi, Randy.
Hey, Greg. We just got done having an absolutely wonderful interview.
Had a ball.
And this is like the beginning of the radio tour, so It was a great way to get us started, and I was almost late. Actually, I was a little late.
You were perfect.
Thank you so much for being so accommodating and stuff.
Thank you, Randy. We really had a ball. I had a lot of good feedback from my listeners during and after the interview, and your double CD is amazing. I can't wait to go home and review it and bring it back to the station so we can be playing it here on both stations, KSVR and KSVU. Upriver Radio is the latter. And thank you, Randy, and please, please, please come back.
Oh, I'm going to certainly do that. Thank you so much, Greg. Okay, well, I'm
all mine.
Gonna cut out.
Welcome to another episode of Into the Arts. Our guest today is Randy Hathaway, and he's going to share with us the story behind classical guitar in America, and it's a fascinating story. And then we're going to talk about this project, which was a fairly lengthy process from inception to completion. There's a lot of songs on this album. Is there any ones that had a super special inspiration, something that you did or something that happened to you that really inspired a piece of music?
Garden was kind of what got this whole entire composing idea planted in me many years ago. I'd say about 18 years ago. Garden is a piece for voice and guitar. I did not go to school to compose. Never thought I was going to be a composer. And I had an experience one day that triggered a memory. It was a little bit of a painful memory, and I was trying to figure out how I was going to work through that. As soon as I got home, for whatever reason, I grabbed my guitar, went right to my bedroom, and started to express these emotions through some text and the guitar, which I had never done before. And as soon as I did that, I knew, I think I'm writing my first classical piece of music.
So do you have any anecdotes about this process, funny stories, things that happened?
One of the things I loved when I was in the studio is that it could get really intense. You know, the engineer used to mention that you become really hypersensitive with your ears, and you can have long sessions. You've been hearing your music probably literally 1,000 times at some points. The engineer was a wonderful, wonderful guy named Michael Thomas Connolly, who owns Empty Sea Studio in Seattle, where I recorded this. He would get on alternate instruments and start playing my melodies. So all of a sudden we would take a break and he would be on the stand-up bass and he would play one of the melodies, or he'd pick up the ukulele or mandolin, and I'm going to pronounce it incorrectly. It's an automaton. It's a little instrument. You'd have to look it up on the internet, like a little recorder that you would finger, and it's got a little mouth to it, and it makes some really funny sounds. So every once in a while I'll hear one of my beautiful classical melodies coming through what sounded like a recorder, and it was the funniest thing. So he would do that quite often. Those were kind of things that kept me really grounded, like, you know, as serious as you are getting and involved in this,
it's time to break that
and have a good laugh and just, you know. So those were beautiful moments. When the microphones went on, everybody got super serious. You know, when it was time to be serious, everybody got serious. But when everybody took a break, or prior to recording or afterwards, everybody was so loose and so friendly with one another, connected. It was an absolutely wonderful experience to hang out with all these musicians and go through this process. Best experience of my life.
Sounds like it was a whole lot of fun.
It was.
Hard.
Lengthy.
Lengthy.
Yeah.
Sometimes you wonder if the end's going to actually...
Yeah, I think I probably wondered that a few 100,000 times.
Alrighty, well, thanks for your time today. I really appreciate it. And we will we'll keep in touch.
Oh, thank you, Jeannie.
I am sitting here with the composer of this music, Randy Hathaway. Hi, Randy.
Hi, how you doing, Don?
I almost feel like I should just not talk over this music. I make my living talking over music. This is beautiful music.
Thank you.
How do you find inspiration in this world where you're operating now, in this composing, arranging world?
Well, first of all, I get all my inspiration from God right off the bat. So there's a big spiritual part of myself in this music. If I had to talk about...
isn't that everywhere?
It is everywhere. And in fact, a lot of the pieces on here deal with landscapes and environment. They deal with love. They deal with time. They deal with things that are in nature all around us. And so I write about that stuff.
When I listen to Aaron Copland, I kind of just close my eyes and go to another place. What do you... Would you compare yourself, or you put yourself in the same boat here?
I love Aaron Copland.
Yeah, okay. I wondered if maybe that
And
was it.
I have listened to some interviews. I've geeked out on interviews by Aaron Copland. And there's a number of radio interviews going back to the 50s that I found on the internet. I didn't come to Aaron Copland's music until I started writing a lot of this American sound. In fact, I hadn't listened to any really American composers. It was always European and a lot of Spanish Latin, which is predominantly what's in classical music. And predominantly in classical guitar, you're going to get a heavy dose of Spanish and Latin in there. So when I started writing all this American music, I thought, where's this coming from? And then I thought the first person, I should go listen to some Aaron Copland because I had heard that name, and Leonard Bernstein. And it took me not very long to connect with Aaron Copland's music.
You know, as I first discovered that music, somebody said, this is American music. And I wondered, well, you know, what does that mean? And then you
Exactly.
listen, and then you know what that means.
Exactly. And that was a question that he proposed to himself and that he talked about in interviews. And it was a question that I proposed to myself early on when this music started to come out. And I said, what is this American tonality that's coming out of me? And I had to ask myself, what is an American tonality? So I figured it out through theory, but you're right. As soon as you hear it, you know it.
Hey, Randy, have you ever had the feeling that you wish there could be a soundtrack playing in your mind all day? I mean, maybe we watch too many movies or something, but I'm like that. I wish I could have a soundtrack this music reminds me of.
I think the last 10 years, I've almost listened to orchestral music exclusively, from Stravinsky to Copland. I love orchestral music. And in fact, when I do write, I've got that in my ears sometimes. One of the things, as we're listening to Exodus right now, I remember telling the violist and the guitarist at the time, please try to pretend like you're an orchestra playing this, but you're only two modest instruments here. And so at times they have to fill up the space as if they are a full orchestra.
Well, Randy, I feel like I have met another music person. Serious music person. This is going to be really great. Randy's a nice guy, too. Randy, thanks for coming in, man.
Hey, thank you.
You are tuned in to a live interview with myself, Susie Prez, and traveling classical composer and producer Randy Hathaway.
Oh, thank you for having me, Susie.
So let's start at the beginning. When did music start for you?
Just growing up as a kid, there was always music around with my family. My dad played a little piano. He was really into the 1940s big band era. Louis Armstrong was his favorite. But he'd sit around the piano and he would play a few classical pieces, jazz pieces, and he also loved movie themes. So I studied piano for about a month and a half. I was about 6 until I heard the word recital. But I would say when it really started going for me was when I was about 15. One of my very close friends at the time had told me he was getting himself together in a rock band. And he invited me over to their rehearsal. And I just saw how much attention all these folks were getting. And I just wanted to play so bad. And I actually had a guitar at that time. I just didn't know how to play it. And so I made the decision to go take lessons. But when I hit about 19, I had met this girl. She loved all the same type of music I loved, except for she played Chopin on the piano. So she would have me sit after school and listen to her play these Chopin preludes or nocturnes. And I really kind of enjoyed it. But then she said, you know, I really like classical guitar. So I thought, well, maybe if I went and got one, this would be a romantic thing a boyfriend should do. So
A little motivation, huh?
yeah, a little motivation. It was just a handful of years later that I ended up at Cornish College of the Arts in Seattle.
So what came next?
Right out of school, I got into 2 chamber ensembles. There was a community guitar orchestra, and I met a wonderful woman who's on the CD. D.G. Killian came in on my senior recital as a vocalist, and we did some voice and guitar duets, and we said, you know what? Let's keep this going. We put together her husband, Bob Tangney, who was a vocalist on another track, and we incorporated flute and piano and percussion and a violist. And we just like friends, colleagues. People would bring music and say, hey, let's try this out.
All in the
So,
classical realm.
yes and
Or
no.
jazz a little
Here's
bit.
what's got really interesting about that. We were all classically trained musicians, and nobody said, this is the kind of music we're going to do. So what ended up happening is that everybody started bringing this folk music. So we started finding this folk music from Brazil or Greece. We even did a Native American lullaby by the Cheyenne Indians. And if we did some traditional composers, a lot of times it was traditional composers who were writing pieces based off of folk melodies. So there was this beautiful influence and simplicity in that music that was attracting us all. So it was sometimes classical and a lot of times not.
And when you kind of come up with an idea for a song, and you said that like nature or some of the higher elements of our human existence kind of inspire a song or a composition, and you're not finished with it and it's sitting over there on the side waiting for you, what is the experience of bringing it back in and reinventing it and getting to know that composition?
So when I put down a composition, sometimes I do because maybe I get to a point where I'm starting to feel a little bit of a burnout. So I have to kind of clear everything off the table, bring it back into my mind and say, why were you writing this? What were you doing here, here, and here? So it's always a challenge, but it happens all the time. Pieces overlap. Sometimes you need to put it down, give it a little bit of a rest. And when you come back to them, sometimes you'll have all these brand new ideas going. So that's always the benefit of it.
That's what I was going to ask. If it changes enough to re-inspire you to finish it, kind of an incubation period where something new comes in.
Absolutely.
It's that magic, right? Well, we're just about out of time. I want to really thank you, Randy. This was very fun and exciting just to hear something different.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thank you, Randy.
For this hour, a composer whose music we've played several times on the Guitar Hour over the last season has created a recording, 2-CD set called Classical Guitar in America. And here he is, Randy Hathaway, the composer of this beautiful music. Good morning, Randy, and welcome.
Good morning, Vern. Thank you for having me.
Randy, it's such a huge and cohesive project. You've devoted your life to this for about half a decade or so.
I think that I probably started composing the very first set of pieces back in about 2000, about 18 years to date. So,
and then specifically on the recording to finance it, to get all the recording sessions, all the people together, just must have been a full-time job for a long time.
I saved my finances literally for 10 years. I would put a little money aside every month I could, called it my music fund. Even when we got ready to go on the recording, I still hadn't had all the finances, so I continued to do some very odd jobs. And every penny I made, it literally went into the music fund. So, it cost money to do this, without a doubt.
Yeah. You wrote a piece called Engage, and it's that so seemingly perfect combination. Talk about flute and guitar together.
Engage was the first time I sat down to ask myself if I could seriously compose music. And the first movement came out, which we'll hear, Engage, and I just put a Roman numeral 1 next to it. And I thought I was done. I had a couple people test it out, and they really enjoyed it. And they said, boy, I'd like to have more. It took me about another 9 years before I came out with Engage number 2. But over the years, I kept thinking about, this word came into my mind about deconstructing. What I wanted to try to do was take something that was already formed and then somehow tear it apart, sort of deconstruct it. And so that's exactly what I did to get the second movement, Engage, to work with the first movement. That was my variation, deconstruct it.
flute and guitar piece, two-movement piece called Engage, written by my guest Randy Hathaway, played here by Tori Kaminsky, the flutist, and Jason Williams, the guitarist. And, we neglected to talk much about your music background. Where have you done your study and such?
So I'm a graduate of Cornish College of the Arts
okay.
in Seattle. And again, I studied classical guitar performance. And that's where my formal
And
training
who was your
was.
guitar teacher?
It was Stephen Novacek.
Oh, yeah, sure, of course.
Yeah, he was
famous name in guitars.
Yeah, he was a great gentleman, and he was a great teacher for me. He taught both at Cornish and the University of Washington at the time. He had both gigs, but so yeah.
I maybe could have guessed, just based on the fact that you're this interesting, that you would have been involved with Cornish. Thanks for coming by.
Thank you so much, Fern.
Randy Hathaway and his music.
This is Laura with Acousticity Radio Show on KWCW 90.5 FM Walla Walla with a special show. I have with me in the studio Randy Hathaway.
Hi, Laura. How you doing?
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing good.
Warm enough for you?
No.
I'm not sure the air conditioning is working in here. You said you drove here in a Jeep with no air conditioning.
No air conditioning. I think, what was the temp, about 105 today?
At least, yeah.
I think I was out on the road for almost 4 hours, and I had the top down. And
That's why he wears that cowboy hat you see in the picture.
But I also wear earplugs because I'm having a little problems with tinnitus in my ears.
Oh, no.
So I plug up real well when I'm out in the Jeep. I love the Jeep. I'm going to go do some wine tasting this weekend while I'm here. I'll wait till after the event, but I'm going to take an extra day.
Oh, you're not going to go tonight?
Well, I might have something with dinner or something like that. I'll play it by ear.
I was
But
going to offer to buy you a glass somewhere.
oh, then I have to accept then. But while I'm out, it is so much fun to have the top down in the Jeep, and I've done this in California and do some wine tasting. And I'm from Central Washington, and I'm really about the elements in an environment. A lot of that comes through with this music, I feel like. So I try to be authentic about the experiences that I have on a day-to-day basis and bring that into my art and stuff.
And you are living in Yakima?
I am. I just moved back to Yakima. I was born and raised in Yakima and lived 29 years in Seattle, and then I am back in Yakima as of recently.
So you were in the Union Bulletin in the Marquee, the entertainment section.
Oh, that's great.
This on yesterday's paper that was talking about your latest CD, which is Classical Guitar in America. See the words classical guitar, and you think it's all one style, a wide variety, very nice listening.
And I mixed it up so that none of the guitar solos or the voice and guitar pieces are clumped together. So as you're listening through either disc, you're getting a variety of instrumentations and styles. So it's a good listening to keep you engaged.
It is, yes. Keeps you interested. And the songwriting process you were going to talk about.
I usually compose, I always think about flow. And I don't think about form, although forms do come out, I think, sometimes very naturally. One that I could mention in Garden has a real traditional form that's been used for hundreds of years, but I never thought about that. Other things I think are very free form, but I always think about flow. So things have to feel just right from the moment that they start till they end. And if they don't, well, it drives me just about up the wall.
So it takes a little tweaking sometimes?
Sometimes it takes a little or a lot.
Yeah.
And I'm very, very particular.
Do you want to play something to end the show with?
Why don't we go ahead and go to
Okay,
a voice and
love
guitar?
that.
So why don't we end with Garden, and this is Whitney Lyman on voice and Jessica Papkoff on guitar.
In the garden, the sun returns, waking the earth, spoils of bloom. In the garden, all are singing joy, singing joy, singing joy.
Garden on Classical Guitar in America, compositions by Randy Hathaway. Again, he will be at Eternal Wines tomorrow. So go and get your copy signed. Give him a hug and a glass of wine. He's traveling around the Northwest. So we'll see you Monday, and I'll play more from this album Monday night at 8. Stay cool.
You're listening to KMUZ Northwest Notes. I'm Mick, and I happen to have Randy Hathaway sitting here with me. Hi there.
Hey, Mick, how you doing?
Good. Thanks for coming down here.
Thanks, Mick, for having me.
Yeah, so you're from Yakima. Now, Yakima's a decent-sized city, right?
Yeah, there's probably about 100,000 people there, heavy on the agriculture. I grew up with my grandparents were farmers, and my dad was an entomologist, and that's exactly why I became a classical musician.
Right. What brought you to this place where you're composing and having someone else perform?
I think it was a natural progression. So my formal training is in classical guitar. And somewhere toward my senior year, I took an ensemble class with voice where I came in as a guitar player to accompany the vocalist, and they didn't have any music. So I started getting handed piano scores and asked if I could arrange. And of course I said, yeah, which I couldn't.
Right.
But I said, sure, I can do it. And I did. And I had some quick success at it. Post-graduation, I got involved with a couple opera singers up in the Seattle area, and we incorporated piano and flute, percussion, and a viola at some point. And again, I started getting thrown a ton of stuff to arrange because we didn't have anything generally for guitar. And I had arranged for at least a solid 3 years, and then through some interesting circumstances, composing kind of came along. I think the progression of going from a performer to arranging to a composer felt somewhat natural at this point when I look back. You can kind of carry those experiences with you along the way.
Arranging sounds so difficult to me.
Yeah.
I mean, I can play my part, but...
Do you know when it gets really difficult? Is when you have to look at an orchestral score. And I've done some arranging on that, and that just about blows me away. It puts your brain into overload. One page will show you a few measures, and you'll look at maybe 16 to 30 different instrumentalists on that page, and some of them are in different tunings. Yeah, you'll go, okay, this guy's in B flat, and this person's in F, and this person's in standard tuning. Who's got the lowest note here? And then I just know that just about drives you insane. So it can be really cumbersome, but at the same time, it can be very stimulating too.
Now, that progression from arranging to composing, which do you prefer?
I like them both. After I mentioned that I composed or arranged for a number of years, when I got into composition, I stopped arranging. And a few years ago, I was listening to a lot of Copland, and I kept thinking, oh, I wish Copland had written something for the guitar. I love these pieces. And then I just thought, well, why don't you arrange it? And so I got back into arranging, and oh boy, when you take something that you love, put it on your instrument, and it sounds equally as good, it is really satisfying.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely. So I want to make sure folks know out there that this is Randy Hathaway that's been on the show. Your album is called Classical Guitar in America, and it's available at randyhathaway.com.
Yes.
Well, Randy, thank you very much for hanging out in here with me today.
Thank
Safe
you
travels.
so much, Mick.
You bet.
My guest for today's show is Seattle composer and artist Randy Hathaway, who has just recently released a comprehensive double CD of original compositions for classical guitar entitled Classical Guitar in America. It is great listening, blending global influences, and is a strong contribution to the modern guitar repertoire. This interview was conducted in the KVOG main studio. Here's your interview.
You do with your different pieces, you've obviously chosen, I'm going to have this, a guitar and a flute.
Yeah.
I'm going to have this one as 3 guitars. Or I'm going to have this one. Obviously, you're choosing your voices for a particular piece. I didn't see any piano in your pieces.
Yeah, there's going to be one coming out this winter.
Do you compose on the piano?
No, and at some point I think I'm going to try that as a fun experiment.
Yes, which is funny because 9 out of 10 people compose on the piano.
I know. I composed this whole entire album on the guitar, which is fine because that's the instrument I know well. But at some point, yeah, I'd love to challenge myself and get on the piano. I don't play the piano, but I know the makeup of it.
I wonder how your mind works, because I think for most people, when you're involved in music to any extent and you're conceptualizing the way music works, you think in terms of the piano. You think in terms of the way those scales are, the way the chords are, the way all the keys fit in harmony with each other. But to compose outside of that conceptual framework is kind of interesting to me.
Well, the piano is a very visual instrument, as you were just mentioning. When you look at the keyboard, you get
you can see how everything fits together.
You get the white keys, the black keys. You can see how the scales, like you say, everything works. So you can see the octaves. The guitar is not as visual, but I play it, so it's visual to me at this point. It's also not as large. It's only about half the size of the distance of the piano. So with the piano and you compose, you obviously have the ability to really have higher and lower octaves involved if you want. But I do hear the piano when I compose sometimes on the guitar, because I listen to a fair amount of piano, and I love the sound of the piano, and I love the range of the piano, and I love some of the compositions. So sometimes when I compose on the guitar, the piano and orchestra actually get into my head.
You come from a family of keyboard players.
My dad
and
was.
You wanted to have a unique voice, so you decided, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do the guitar. How did you get a guitar? Was it a gift for Christmas?
I bugged my mom, and I ended up getting a guitar when I was about 13, tried to teach myself how to play it, and then I decided that I was going to sell it and use the money to buy a motorcycle. And then I remember my mother was really disappointed. She goes, I really was looking forward to you learning to play the guitar. And I said, well, Mom, I'll tell you what. I'll run an ad in the paper. If it doesn't sell, I'll go learn how to play it. So I ran an ad. Only one person came over to look at the guitar. Wasn't right for them. And I kept my promise.
Welcome back to KBOG's Banded Voices. As mentioned at the start of our show, all music played during this interview comes from Randy Hathaway's double CD set entitled Classical Guitar in America. I want to thank Randy for including us on his interview tour and for taking the time to talk with us. And in case you were not aware, you are listening to the great KBOG 97.9 FM, your Banded Community Radio.
Well, welcome to KXCR Conversations. My name is Larry Bloomfield, and today we're speaking with Randy Hathaway. Randy, tell me, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Larry. Thanks for having me.
Oh, not a problem. Now, what made you decide that you needed many people involved in this?
Well, that's a great question. I really thought that I might need about 8 or 9 people.
Mm-hmm.
We had a few guitar ensembles. There's a duet, trio, and a quartet. So I was like, well, I'm going to need 4 guitarists. There's also a flute and violist. So I figured a couple more, an instrumentalist, and then I wrote some pieces for voice. I thought, okay, if I can get away with 8 or 9, I think we're doing pretty good. But what happens is it requires a large commitment.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't have a large budget.
Mm-hmm.
I had a very modest budget. When I sat down to start talking to the musicians, most of them said, well, listen, we could commit to just 1 or 2 pieces.
Well, we're going to play a few compilations from the CDs, allow our listeners to be able to get an idea of the quality that you put into the CDs.
absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, Gypsy Day Malaga was one of my very first pieces that I wrote.
Mhm.
I wrote it for the Seattle Guitar Orchestra in an earlier, more simplified form, because they were a community orchestra. And then at some point, I decided I really wanted to take that piece and condense it down to a quartet, but really take the parts to a higher professional level.
Mhm.
And I was fortunate that the Minneapolis Guitar Quartet, who's a well-known quartet on an international level, actually took that piece and performed it back east.
Mm.
And I think it was my first piece that was ever performed on the radio as well. It's been well received with the public. It's
Mhm.
got all these beautiful Spanish and flamenco tonalities with it. The players on it, I want to certainly mention them. We have Mark Wilson and Eric Branner and Robert Bierschling and Michael Nicolella, who round out the quartet.
You were saying that you have artists that had drawn some stuff, and I noticed that you used some of your family members as your sister.
I did. My sister Sandra Fredrickson probably produced the most art because I asked her to. She was my sister, right?
Yeah, that always works.
I first came to her about doing the album cover, and she, when she was younger, in her college years, she studied art formally, and that's what she wanted to go into. But, you know, life has very many different journeys.
Oh, yes.
And she became, you know, a mother to two wonderful girls that are my nieces, and she always talked about art, so I drew her back in after many years, and she did the front cover and did a beautiful job
Yes.
on the front cover.
Yes. Nice to see how you were able to tie in the visual with your music.
Well, you know, I could have literally just come up with one design because we have 15 compositions across the two albums, and I wanted to render all of them into sheet music form for publication. So I
Nice.
just came up with one design and called it good, and that would have actually been a very easy thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm an overachiever at times, and I had, as we just mentioned, some family members who were artists, and then I had some great friends and colleagues who did art. Once that idea got planted in my head, I couldn't turn back. I
Yeah.
said, you know, if we could put a unique image on the front cover of each piece of sheet music that would have a nice marriage to the music, somehow that it would relate to the music, that would be the most special thing, is to collaborate with all these people, put their artwork out there for everybody to see, and then the musicians who buy that sheet music, they get a sense of the music right off the bat when they see the art on the front cover. So it just made one more, you know, very special element, but it also made one more very lengthy and long learning experience for me. Absolutely.
I think that you're doing a wonderful job out there, and you take care.
Thank you,
and
Larry.
thank you very much for this KXCR Conversations. This has been Larry Bloomfield. Have a good day.
I am here with Randy Hathaway, who is a composer from the Pacific Northwest. Randy has composed about 15 wonderful songs that he features on his new album, Classical Guitar in America. And what we'd like to do is talk about each one of the songs and his compositions, creative process behind composing these particular pieces, and the people that play on them. When you first conceived of this album, were you thinking about doing an album, or were you just thinking about composing that particular piece?
Oh, I think probably at the very onset I was thinking about just writing individual pieces and just enjoying the experience. It was all brand new to me.
Yeah, that is fun, isn't it?
Yeah, and it was just, you know, it was starting to pour out, so I was just trying to enjoy the process. And once I started seeing enough music start to fill up potentially a small program, I started thinking about, well, maybe I should do an album at some point. All these instruments that are on this album play with the guitar very beautifully. Most of them are very common. You hear a lot of voice and guitar and flute and guitar. Not so much viola and guitar, but you do occasionally, and that's a beautiful pairing for the guitars. But I had played with all these instruments, so when I came to writing them, I had a little bit of knowledge, at least from being on the side of the classical guitarist in performance and practices.
The next song that we're going to hear, he's titled Psalms.
So we have Bob Tangney on voice, and we have a gentleman named Robert Bierschling on the guitar. So one of the things I did is I had worked with Bob for years in this great ensemble of friends and colleagues. And so I knew that I wanted him to come in and record this. He's a baritone. He sang in the chorus with the Seattle Opera for years. But I kind of wrote the piece up in the tenor range for Bob, which had some challenges.
Definitely evil.
Yeah, definitely evil. Well, here's some interesting things that came out of that, though. Bob had to learn to go up into his falsetto, and his wife is also on this album. She's on the other disc. And DG helped Bob figure out how to get comfortably up into his falsetto. And when you hear Bob, he has got a great falsetto. So in some great ways, you challenge people to do things that they haven't done before, and then all of a sudden it might have a good repercussions as this did. But he still probably had a few choice words for it to say when he had to sing
I know, because I'm singing Beethoven's Ninth, and I sing bass, and he's making us sing up in the tenor range, and that is so hard, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, and I know there are other composers who've done that, so I just felt like, well, if they've done it, I can do it.
Absolutely.
For he acknowledges my name, I will deliver him.
Randy, the next song is titled Song of the Ballerina.
Yes, this features D.G. Killian on the voice and Jessica Papkoff on the guitar. I actually wrote the melody. There's a main melody and a counter melody, and I wrote those first, and then I had to harmonize those. And usually I don't do that. Usually I write harmony, and I let the melody sort of spin organically out of writing my harmony. And that's why you'll hear some of my music always sounds lyrical, because my chord progressions are almost following some sort of melodic contour. But here it was melody right from the very get-go, and then I had to turn around and write harmony, which I think is more common with what composers do, but not what I do. So it was fun compositionally to do something like that. But the story is once I realized it was going to be for voice and guitar, it used to remind me, I had grandparents on both sides of the family that were farmers over in central Washington. And my grandmother had a little music box when we were kids growing up. I would go down there and you would wind this thing up, lift the lid up, and a little ballerina would pop up and dance around, and it would play this beautiful little classical piece. And I was more interested in just the mechanics of the idea of winding up the box and stuff. My sisters were a little bit older, and they'd go into my grandmother's room and get her hats and her shoes on, and she would keep her jewelry in there. So they'd go over to the box, and they'd grab the jewelry out and play dress up with it. When I started writing the melody to Song of the Ballerina, it just had a charm that reminded me of that music that used to play out of that. I think my father and my grandfather had given that to her as a gift, and she always loved that music box. And I actually brought my father in on this project to do a little artwork for the cover of the sheet music, since the fact is that was his mother's music box that I tell a story about, how I interacted with it and how my sisters interacted with that music box.
That's a wonderful story.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And then the whole family got involved. It was
It's a wonderful song. This is one I'm familiar with.
It's really pretty.
Yeah.
The silver key continues to turn until the silence is left to unwind. The ballerina waits and dances.
Thank you so much, Randy. I really enjoyed the interview, and I've learned more. You know, it's always amazing to find out how people put together and how people come up with ideas for their compositions.
Hey, Gib, thank you so much, and thank you, KYAQ, for having me today. That was wonderful.
Hello, and welcome to another special presentation by Grace Harbor's Community Public Radio. Today's presentation is a conversation with Randy Hathaway. Originally from Yakima, he's been a performer, teacher, administrator, composer, arranger, and producer, and in 2017 released a new album, Classical Guitar in America. I spoke with Randy in August of 2018, so we can listen in on that conversation.
I was wondering who might have been your musical influences.
You know, if I go back about 30 years and I start thinking about when I first started getting into classical music, I was probably most attracted to, and most classical guitarists might mention this, to the Spanish and Latin repertoire. And that's really prevalent in the classical guitar field. So probably early on, Joaquin Rodrigo and Francisco Tárrega, and then getting over to the Latin side, love the Cuban composer Leo Brouwer. And getting into South America, we had a plentiful amount, you know, Aitor Villalobos and Barrios, and it just keeps going on and on. But what's interesting, probably in the last 10 years, I have been on this American kick, and I have just fell in love with the music of Aaron Copland. And I found some other gems along the way. There's a guy named Harold Shapiro, who Aaron Copland mentioned was probably one of the greatest American composers of the mid-20th century. Unfortunately, Harold never became prolific in his writing, but what he did write just blows me away. He was a beautiful writer, and then I can take it further. I've just been listening to a lot of orchestral music, and Leonard Bernstein's another great, well-known American composer, and the list goes on. There was actually a project, hopefully down the road, I won't say too much about it, but it was about 2/3 way finished that could explore this beautiful music of all these composers I mentioned and more.
Oh, interesting. And so what's coming down the road for Randy Hathaway that you could talk about?
Yeah, what I can talk about. Well, I'm going to do a couple small things. This thing was so monumental in its size and took such a long time. So there's a piece on the album called Concorde that I wrote for a guitar trio. And I heard a lot of piano tonality in my head early on when I was writing it, even though it is supposed to be about the tonality of the guitar. But the guitar and the piano are very similar. They're both percussively pitched instruments, and that can create harmony. So what I did is I did an arrangement for solo piano. And Leon Reese, who did the artwork for the sheet music of Concorde, the guitar trio, is also submitting artwork for Concorde, the piano solo. And it's beautiful. I cannot wait. I love showcasing people's works. It's just awesome. And it's great to be able to collaborate with people. So that's going to happen probably real soon. There's a new piece that I've written for guitar in a instrument called the Concorde, or most people might recognize it as the English horn. It's in the oboe family. It's pitched just a little bit lower and a little more mellow, and I have the sneaky suspicion it's going to be a beautiful friend with the classical guitar. So, and I want to add dance to it. It'll sit on its own as the idea, as a beautiful duet between guitar and the Concorde, but I want to add a movement, maybe a single dancer who can do a lot of modern movement with it, and it's going to be called Urban Dance. So hopefully that will get formulated sometime in the very near future, maybe a couple other pieces as well.
Well, and it sounds like you're kind of putting together instruments that people wouldn't normally think of. Guitar and English horn. Well, we're getting close on time, and so I wanted to make sure and thank you, Randy Hathaway, for speaking with us here at KGHI. This has been very interesting, very exciting, and it's been an honor and a pleasure. And we wish you certainly continued success, and I can see nothing but that in the near future.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Thank you for listening to this special presentation of Grays Harbor's Community Public Radio, our conversation with Northwest guitarist, producer, and composer Randy Hathaway.